All right, in this quick tutorial, we're going to be learning how to comp a product into a real 3D scene that has some lights to do mock-ups and renders and things like that. Now, the program we're going to be using today is actually called Adobe. It's from Adobe, and it's called Substance 3D Stager. So if you have an Adobe subscription, you can go ahead and launch that and then install the Substance 3D Stager. I believe it's also free for students and educators, so you can sign up as a student and get a free copy of this. Now, there are so many 3D apps out there. And just to show you a few of these, this is a list on Wikipedia, which just shows a list of all the 3D softwares that are out there. And you can see there is just a ton of these. Many of these are free and open source, however, many of these are paid. Now, the most popular 3D software out there that is the free and open source software is a software called Blender. So if you see down here, this one right here is called Blender. It's a full-featured 3D rendering, lighting, animation, rigging, and even VFX software. I may end up doing a couple of video tutorials on Blender in the future, so stay tuned for that. But for today, we're going to be using the one called Stager. Now, this is a fairly user-friendly, beginner, approachable program when you're just starting into 3D. So that's the one we'll be using for this exercise. Now, the project we're going to be doing is we're actually going to be creating a book cover and then modeling that into a 3D scene. Now, if you've been on my channel for a while, you'll recall that I actually designed a book cover. I'll put a little card here with a link. But this is a Photoshop exercise that we did a while back where we designed a book cover using Adobe Photoshop. So in today's exercise, we're going to take this book cover that we've designed and then wrap it on a real 3D model of a book and then render it in a scene as if the book was like on a library bookshelf or in a coffee shop or something like that for a composition. Now, this same workflow you can do for all sorts of things, products and badges and bags and backpacks and things like that. If you're doing graphic design work and you want to see how your designs look in a real world mockup. Of course, the first step is you need to take your, in this case, book cover and export it. So I've already gone ahead and done that. I just went here and said File, Export, and I just exported this as a PNG file. And this is now on my desktop, ready to go. So the second thing you're going to need to do is sort of find an image that you're going to use as your background. Now, what I like to do is I just come over to Pixabay or Pexels or something like that and just search for a royalty-free image of something you're going to want to use. So I can just come in here and maybe search for like a desk or a desktop or something like this and scroll down through these images until you find something you like. So maybe I want to comp my book into this scene. I can go ahead and download this photo, maybe place my book over here on this corner. So whichever of these you want to go with, I actually am going to go with this particular image in this design. So I've grabbed this image and downloaded this because it has a lot of space here in the middle where I'll be able to place my books. I went ahead and downloaded this. I just did the 1920 by 1304 for the actual image size. So once you have your book cover image and then you have your background image, we're ready to go. So let's now jump over into Stager. Now, one thing I do want to mention is that the Adobe Substance Suite is fairly new. It's only been around for a couple of months. Adobe bought a program, a company that essentially had some of these offerings, and then have integrated it into the Adobe Creative Cloud. So Substance 3D Stager is actually a new program. They've essentially broken them down into 4. So I want to quickly show you this because if you don't have Substance 3D Stager as part of your Creative Cloud package, there's another software you can use. We just have to toggle this on. You can see they've broken that down into 3D Painter, 3D Sampler, 3D Designer, and 3D Stager, which is the one we're going to be using. 3D Stager is essentially a replication of the old software that Adobe had, which was called Adobe Dimension. Now you'll note if you're looking at your all apps, you may not even see available the Adobe Dimension. You can see right here, mine's showing up here. So if you don't see Stager, go ahead and download Dimension. The concepts are almost the exact same. In fact, the software is nearly identical. If you don't see Adobe Dimension, you can go to your preferences here underneath your Creative Cloud app, and then you can come down in here and there's an option here under apps, which will allow you to toggle on old apps. So I'm actually not sure where it's at in here. I don't see it in mine, but I have seen it in the past. Maybe it's not on this new version I have. installed. But anyway, when you come into the preferences, sometimes there's a little toggle here that says show older apps or something like that, enable older apps. You toggle that on, and then that will allow Adobe Dimension to show up here. So if you don't see it, double check here in your settings and turn that on. Okay, so back to Substance 3D Stager. Now what we're going to do is we're just going to create a new blank document here. So I'll just go ahead and say create new. And this will open up the base stage here. Now, this program again is beginner friendly because they have a bunch of pre-built 3D assets that you can just go ahead and drag and drop into your workspace. You can see all sorts of bags and cans and things like that you could model and sort of work with and put your graphics on, t-shirts, things like that, hats. Now, I'm just going to do a quick search here for book. And you'll see there's several different books here. And I'm just going to grab this one called hardcover book. I want the one that's closed. So you can just go ahead and grab that, click it, and it will drop a copy of that right on here into your stage. I'm just going to call this area the stage or the viewport. Now, just a couple of quick tips. If you've never worked in 3D, you really need a mouse with right click, a mouse wheel, and left click because you're going to be using all of those extensively. You can get away with the trackpad, but it's a little bit tricky. Now, if you just scroll the mouse wheel, you're going to zoom in and out here in the viewport. If you click and hold the middle mouse button down, this allows you to pan, sort of like this. If you right click, okay, this allows me to orbit around the book like this. And those are the primary actions that you'll be using. So you can right click to orbit, you can click and hold the middle mouse button to pan around, and the middle mouse wheel to zoom in and out. Okay, that's the primary ones. Now, you don't have to use the mouse. You can always come over here to the tools and click on the orbit tool, the pan tool, and the dolly tool to do all of those exact same commands that I just did by selecting the tools. But it's much easier with the mouse and you'll get used to it fairly quickly. Now, what I want to show you here is that this 3D object here is actually made up of several what are known as meshes. Now, we don't really need to worry about the gizmo at this point, all these little blue, red, and things like that. That's just the x-axis, the y-axis, and the z-axis. So those are the different axes, and you can see I can grab this and slide this around, and I can grab it and pull it up. And you can do some scaling as well. I can rotate, and I can scale, and there's several things like that we can do. We're going to do that in a minute, just not right now. So the first thing I wanted to show you is over here in the right-hand panel underneath your scenes, you'll see that this is grouped, the hard book cover, and if I open up the folder, there's 4 different meshes that make up this book. And it's kind of hard to see, but when I toggle these off, you'll be able to see. So I'm going to turn each one of these off until I'm down to nothing. So I'm going to start here with the pages mesh. So this is a 3D model that represents the pages of the book. Okay. Now let's turn that one off and let's turn on the cover mesh. And you can see this is the 3D model that represents the outer cover, if this was a hardback book, of course. I can toggle that one off and we can turn on the binding. So this is the binding of the actual book. Let's turn back on the cover and you can kind of see, right, how those two are stored together there. And then lastly, we have this little teeny one called the seal. And those are just those last little 2 pieces right there on the ends for the seal. Now we're not going to be using all 3 of those. Really the only ones we're going to pay attention to are the cover mesh. I'm going to turn these all back on now. So the cover mesh and then the page mesh we're going to mess around with. Okay, so the primary goal here is we need to get our flat 2D image and wrap it around this book cover. Again, because Stager is fairly beginner friendly, it's fairly easy to do, but this process is typically called like UV unwrapping. But in this program, it's kind of a drag and drop interface. So I can just select my book here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here to my cover mesh. So I'll select the cover mesh. And you can see under here, there are several options that I can do with this guy. So I can transform it. Under object, there's a few options. And then under material, there's a few options as well. Okay. So I can just come in here into my materials and drop a material. Now notice there's also a little shortcut for it right here called place material. So I can either click this one or click this one. They're basically the same thing. So I'm going to go ahead and say place a material on this object. I'll come to my desktop and just choose my bookcover.png file and say open. And this will take a second and it'll drop this right on top of my book. Now you can see the rotation's a little off here. So now I've just got to rotate and scale this guy to match my book. So this little top dongle here allows me to sort of rotate this around. So I'll kind of rotate it in this angle right here. And then I can hold down Shift and click any one of these points, and this will scale it uniformly. If I don't hold down Shift, it's just going to stretch it. So I want to scale uniformly. So I'm going to hold down Shift and kind of scale this way up until mostly I get the tops and bottom edges where I want to go. So I went a little too far there. So I'll scale down a little bit. Again, I'm not paying attention to the sides quite yet. Just scaling up the top to mostly cover that front cover. Just about there. Perfect. Now it does wrap around the edges here, so you want to make sure you scale it up enough so it wraps around the little lip of the hardcover. Okay, now I've scaled that up, I can just go ahead and position it. You can see it's still cut off on the back here. So I'll just grab this and slide it along. So I can just move this over. Whoops, looks like I have some snapping or something going on there. I'm not sure what's happening. Let's pull this down. Yeah, as soon as I wrap that corner, for some reason it's trying to rotate in a funny way. So we can just pull that back. Okay, so we'll just wrap this over, and you're never going to get this perfect because, of course, this depends on the dimensions of your book, how many pages and things like that. So that's pretty close there. It looks like the bottom's nearly wrapped and the top's nearly wrapped. So at this point, I'm actually going to cheat a little bit because if I scale up too much more, I might get this barcode, right? I could sit there and scale this up more like this, but then the barcode's going to be cut off. So here at this point is where I'm going to just stretch to fake it. So I'll come over here to the top now, and in this case I'm just going to grab this point and drag to the right to kind of stretch this over all the way until it wraps just around there, and that's looking pretty good. I'm going to rotate just a hair bit more because that was slightly off. Then I'll come over here and look at the spine there to see, and that actually looks pretty decent right there. So we'll call that good enough, okay? So I've got my book now wrapped. You can see it's wrapping all the way around there, and nothing too terribly is happening there. Maybe I went a little bit too far. I could probably actually come back here, but that's pretty close. Okay, so now we've got that wrapped. Let's go ahead and mess around with the one that's for the pages. So I'm going to come over here to the page mesh, and I don't really need to add a material to this. I guess I could find an image that looks like pages. But to make it simpler on myself, I'm just going to select the page mesh and then come down to the base color. And I'm just going to click on the base color. And right now it's a fairly dark gray. And I'm going to instead pull these over into maybe some yellows and kind of drag this up into a little bit of a lighter color so it kind of looks more like pages out of a novel. So I'm just kind of guesstimating here. Something that makes me happy is right around there. Okay, so that looks okay. Now I've got the pages in there. Maybe it's a hair bright. I'll come down maybe just a tad. And that's pretty much all I want to do there. You can, if you want, also on that mesh, let's go back to the page mesh, you can come down here and play with the roughness and some of these specular settings right here as well. But I'm going to leave those all at default. You can experiment with that on your own. So I've got the pages in place, and I've got my book cover in place. And now comes the part where we need to place this in a scene and then do some lighting effects. So we have here by default what's known as the viewport camera, and that's just the camera that's sort of in this working area while you're messing around, staging and putting some materials in place. But to actually render out a picture, we need to set up our own camera. So we can come up here and just click on the new camera button. This is going to add a new camera, and you can see it just added the camera. Now, whenever you add a camera, it has a specific size, and this one right here is 1920 by 1080 pixels. That's just, I think, the default. But what we're going to do is we're going to add a background image into this camera. So that'll make it so that we can automatically scale here. So notice right over here, there's this background option, and I can click the plus button. So I'm going to say plus, that means add a new background, and I can just go ahead and select. Now here we have a couple of options. Do I want to crop to fit? Do I want to scale to fit? Or do I want to go to the original size? Now in my case, I want to leave it on original size because I want my image not to be 1920 by 1080, but the original size of my image over here. So let's go ahead and grab an image. So here's the little one we downloaded earlier. I'll open that up, and you can see that gets dropped in my scene here. And let's set this to, we want to make this original size. So that's good. And notice it's being cropped a little bit right now, but we're going to change the size of the camera here when we drop this in. Okay, so that's fine there. But they have this little option called Match Image. And what this does is it tries to take the background image that you load and find where the lighting direction is and automatically set up lights to match the lights in your scene. Sometimes it works really well, sometimes you need to adjust them. But what I'm going to do is just click on the Match Image button, and now it will change my camera dimensions to match the image dimensions of my original image. So again, I can set the camera output size to the image size, which is what I want. And yeah, I want to create multiple lights if it's possible to, right? So I can do abstract, outdoor, or multiple lights. I'll just leave it on there. And then go ahead and hit OK. And this will take a second. And it's going to create some lights and match the scene. And notice how it automatically adjusted my camera size. Now it's 1920 by 1304, which is exactly what I want. Perfect. Okay, now I can't see the lights in here because they're these abstract lights that it created, but it does have some shadow we'll see here in a minute. So now the next step is really just rotating and placing this book on my scene to where I want it. Now, this is not always as straightforward, but this image does have a vanishing point, right? If I sort of follow along the edge of this and move out to infinity, it would end up somewhere here. And on the right side, there would be someone that comes in and it would be over here, right? So there is a vanishing point in the scene. And what I essentially want to do is I want to make this grid a line right along the table as if it was laying on top of the table. So I'm just going to rotate this a little bit. You can see these points here. And then I'm going to middle mouse, hold down middle mouse wheel and drag this down. Then I'm going to zoom out a little bit. Middle mouse wheel, come down, rotate a little bit. And really what I'm paying attention to is this left edge of the table right here. I'm trying to make this grid line or one of these grid lines sort of match that same angle. And that way I know my book is going to be in the same perspective plane right on top of the table. So again, zoom out here a little bit because I think I'm a little close, and we'll just kind of pull this book down. And I don't know, I guess it depends on what size you want your book, how much you rotate in and out. But that's pretty close. I think maybe I'm a hair big, so let's pull that down. And again, I'm watching over here to kind of line those two up, make sure they're really close. So maybe just a touch that way, and that's right on the edge. So that's perfect. So now I can just do middle mouse and kind of drag this guy around, and it should, slide right on the table wherever I place it. So I'll kind of just set it here in the middle, and that looks fine enough for me. Okay, now I want to do a little bit of staging. So right now, the book's in there fine, but now I can select the book and rotate it a little bit, make it a little bit more interesting. So maybe I'm going to rotate this way just a touch, and that looks pretty good right there. That'll give me a nice result. Now, just to make sure my shadows are working before I duplicate, I'm actually going to duplicate the book and stand a copy of, maybe rotate another one, lean another book over here so I can see the back cover, kind of just play around with a little bit. But right now, let's just do a quick test. While you're in the camera mode by default, the shadows aren't accurate. We need to turn on this little option right here, which is called ray tracing. So I'm going to toggle on ray tracing, and then you'll see that a bunch of dots appear, and it takes a few minutes, but the shadows get much, much better as it ray traces this. So ray tracing is a computer graphics effect that will make realistic shadows and lights on your objects. So you turn that on and you can kind of see, oh yeah, there is some shadows in there, some nice soft shadows. So that's working fine. So I'm going to turn that back off, and here's where I'll duplicate my objects. So now I'm going to select this book right here, and I'm going to come over here to my, make sure I have the right guy. Yeah, that looks fine. So let's just create a copy of this. So I'm actually going to move over to my viewport camera here so I can kind of see this a little better in this view. It's a little easier to work without all the background in place. And we're going to duplicate it. So over here, you can just select your hard book. I guess I'm going to duplicate the master folder. And then right here, there's this little plus button that says duplicate. So I'll click that, and that just created another copy. There's one on top of one another. So this one I'm just going to kind of pull out, and then maybe this one I'll slide up. And then I'm going to rotate this guy 90 degrees so it's standing straight up. So I'm just looking at that little degree symbol till I hit about 90. And sure, close enough, 90.4. And then I can, of course, rotate this a little bit, this way or this way, however you want this guy to be. Doesn't really matter. Maybe I'll kind of rotate it like so we can kind of see the back cover in there a little bit, the spine, I mean. That looks fine. Now let's duplicate another one. So I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this guy one more time. And this one we will slide over this way. And this one I probably should have duplicated the other one. But this one I want to rotate and maybe lean up against this other book, but upside down. So I'm going to rotate this guy all the way around this way, and then maybe kind of pan over here and slide it back this way, pull this down so it kind of looks like it's maybe leaning up on that book. I don't know, something like yay. Maybe I'll rotate it back like that. Whoops, I was not rotating, I was squishing it. Undo. Had the wrong dongle clicked. This is the one I want. So we'll kind of maybe rotate it this way. And you always have to watch the ground plane, because I can't just come down and stick it on the book like so. I'd say, okay, right there, stuck on the book, but notice that this edge right here is actually below the tabletop. So that's kind of a problem. So then I need to come in and rotate this up a little bit, and a little bit of finesse till you get this exactly the way you want it. Lift that up a little bit. So that's looking pretty good. Maybe I want to actually lean this back my way. And so instead of leaning back, maybe I want to lean it forward. So maybe something like that so we can see a little bit more. I don't know. Beats me. Whatever makes you happy. Just stage these guys a little bit. That's why this program is called Stager, because you're just kind of placing things around in the scene a little bit. So that's right on the ground plane. That looks pretty good. Okay, so now I've got that staged a little bit. Let's jump back over here to our camera. And now we can see those 3 books sort of hanging out there on my desk. And that's looking fine. Now this one, I think they're a little bit too close there. Maybe I want to push that one there, and maybe I actually want to push this one behind the other one. I don't know. That's kind of looks funny. Maybe we'll stick it way over there. Sure, something like that. Looks fine to me. Okay, now we can of course move all these guys around. Whoops, I didn't mean to rotate there my path. So I'm gonna pull that back. So I can grab these guys and slide them over. I don't want it to be quite on top of that. So maybe I'll push these guys around a little bit, pull this one forward a little bit, get a little separation there from the background. Pull this one just a tad. Anyway, something like that. Okay, so that's good enough for now. So I'm going to turn back on ray tracing just for a second, and you'll be able to see these nice soft shadows that start to build underneath the book where it would, it's kind of lifted up off the table. So you get some nice realistic looking shadows there, which is great. Now I think my colors are just a hair bit dull on this. And so what I would want to do now at this point is I'm going to come back here to my camera, which is this scene. I'm going to turn off ray tracing here for a second. And what we can do in the environment, sorry, not camera, but the environment, is we can change some of the lights and some of the settings. So if I come to my environment lighting and I click on the lights tab here under properties, I can increase or decrease the intensity of the environment. So for example, I can pull this down, notice how it all gets blacker. I can change it way higher and it all gets quite a bit more intense. And I can even colorize some of the light as well. Like if I had a nice yellow, I've got really a white scene, but if I had a yellow light, I could come in here and colorize the environment light to be more yellow. But I just want to increase the intensity just a hair bit on that light so I get a little bit more pop out of the book cover this way. Okay, and then once I've got everything staged here, it becomes the time to render out the books. So at this point, I need to go ahead and create my final render. And we do that in this tab over here. It's a dedicated tab called Render. You can also come in here to the Ray Trace settings and adjust some of this as well. If you come into Ray Trace, there's a bunch of options you can have when you have Ray Trace mode turned on. But let's come over here into Render settings, and then we're going to go ahead and render this out. So you can see we've got, I'm actually not sure why I have something called undefined. That seems a little bit goofy. But you should normally just be able to select your camera. Maybe that's actually the viewport camera is my guess. I don't know. Maybe it's just called undefined. Okay, so we want to turn on the camera again. We're in 72 pixels per inch. I guess this is up to you what the resolution here. I'm going to do it in pixels. Exported file name, I'll just call this Final Book Render. And I don't want a Photoshop file. I'm actually going to just export a PNG file. And then you just go ahead and click on the render button. And depending on how fast your computer is, right, if you have a fancy GPU or a CPU, this may take some time. You can see mine's estimating 2 minutes and 26 seconds. So I'll pause the video until this finishes out. Now when I rendered mine just out, I noticed my shadows were a little funny and I was wondering what's going on. And the issue I hadn't realized is my book right here, when I was messing around, I actually made it float. So I needed to come back in here and drag this guy back down and dock him back to the floor plane like that. So I did that and then re-rendered, and I'll show what that final result now looks like right here. So there's my 3 books. You can see the nice, beautiful, soft shadows. We have those little subtle reflections coming in here. 3 books all rotated, and it looks very natural. So that's the final render out. of my scene. It took about 5 minutes because I changed my render settings here in the Substance Stager to high and full resolution. But that's the final render. So the last little thing I want to show you here is that if you happen to be over here in design mode and the objects that you want are not here, you can actually download and import your own. Now you can't model objects really inside of this program. It's not a modeling software, it's more of a staging software. So they do have lots of lights and things like that you can import. We didn't cover adding manual lights, but you can definitely do that. If the automatic lights don't work for you, you can then go ahead and add in some manual lights as well. So, you know, they have all sorts of different lights, point lights, spotlights, things like that. You can add and point them to create some really nice shadows and things like that. But that's for another time. So what I want to show right now is how to bring in your own models. Now, if you don't know how to model, you can come to some free websites. So for example, sketchfab.com is a nice website that I like to visit, that people like to post models. And a lot of these are paid models. You can pay a fee. This one I've searched up here for a book happens to be a free model. It's by user Tralich, so Tralich. Anyway, so you can go ahead and download this one, and you can see it has some attribution. So there's the licensing information about it, and then the different formats. So I've downloaded the GLTF version here of this book. And then when I come over here to Stager again, so this time I'm going to say plus, and instead of browsing one of these ones, I'm going to import into the scene a 3D model from my computer. So I'll come over here to my downloads, I'll come into book, and you can see there's that GLTF file, which is just a common file format for 3D scenes. And I'll go ahead and open that. And it's going to say, if no UVs are found, go ahead and generate them. I don't know if this has UVs or not, but I'll say yes, generate UVs. And you can see there's the model. It's actually in there, but it's huge. See how big that book is compared to our book? So the scale here is quite a bit different. So I would need to get my gizmo here, and I can just grab any one of these cubes and hold down Shift and scale down on all 3 axes at the same time. So that'll be a bit better. And then pull this guy back up, and maybe we'll just kind of drag it over here and scale it down a hair bit. But anyway, that's how easy it is to just grab another asset that you or somebody else has made, and I can bring that into my scene, and then all the workflow is the same, right? I can grab this guy. I don't know how this is put together. I can come in here and look at the root mesh. Looks like there's the actual mesh, and I can again add a material to it, and I'll just go ahead and drop in that same material we worked with before, the book cover.png, and drop that in there. And sure enough, it comes in, so I can stretch this. Now again, this probably is not going to work because the UVs I don't think are generated here. Yeah, you can see it's doing okay until it gets these little weird corner pieces, and it's not sure how it's supposed to wrap around those, but it is wrapping a little bit around the front and the back. But we'd really have to create the UV mappings to make it work properly. But you can definitely import 3D models and work with them. So last setting, I think I've said this is the last thing 6 times, but one last little thing here is if you have a background picture, right, like in our render, if your background picture has depth of field where the objects in the distance are very blurry and objects close are very clear, that's called depth of field, you can actually simulate that as well in your 3D renders. So over here, you can just, select, we actually do this, let me back up, we do this in the camera settings. So you can select your camera and then come down here to the depth of field. And my image doesn't have depth of field, and I'm not sure I have really enough depth in this image to simulate this. But you can turn on depth of field and then how much blurring you want. So I can crank up the blur here, and you can basically simulate that depth of field blur within the software as well. So we can do that. Whoops. We can do that and then simulate this. You'll need to have your ray tracing turned on to get that simulated. You can see I've turned it up so much it's made it disappear. But yeah, that is the, whoops, I'm in the wrong spot again, sorry. Background blur. Gotta come back to my camera. There we go. So there's the blur amount. You can see that it's really kind of going a little crazy here with the blur amount. But you can set your focus points and then determine how much blurring takes place on that depth of field blur. So kind of a fancy little feature as well to simulate that. Anyway, I think that's it for now. I hope you liked the tutorial. If you'd like to see more 3D stuff, just let me know down in the comments. And give us a thumbs up, like, and we hope to see you in the next one.